Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I'm Jordan Jones. The regular season has come to an end, and all 14 teams are preparing to head to Minneapolis for this year's Big Ten tournament. I'll look back on the last few games of the regular season, including a huge win over Illinois, and then we'll reflect on the regular season, on the senior class, preview the Big Ten tournament a little bit, and answer a loaded mailbag. There's a lot to get to today for the final episode of the regular season, first episode of the postseason, however you want to look at it. Let's get on into it. If you don't, be sure to follow the show on Twitter, @BoilersBeyond. A lot to talk about, and with the Big Ten tournament, there's going to be plenty to talk about this week. And subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Going to have, we'll see, probably Tuesday morning next week we'll have a podcast, but maybe we'll do something Sunday. We'll see how the Big Ten tournament unfolds. Nonetheless, going to be plenty of content here. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a thing. You know, normally on this show, I'll really kind of go into some okay depth about the last couple games Purdue's played, but, you know, I don't want to go too crazy. This time of year, the news cycle works quick. The Wisconsin game is already, out of the news cycle a bit as we go into the Big Ten tournament. The Illinois game certainly is, but we haven't podcasted since then. Purdue 77, Illinois 71, Purdue 78, Wisconsin 70. Almost identical scores in those two now that I look at it. Again, not going to break these down in any too crazy of detail, but, you look at the game at Illinois. I think that was a really big, really good win for Purdue. It wasn't one that Purdue needed, which I think adds to the sweetness of it a little bit. Purdue had already locked up a share of the regular season title. And I think, let's face it, most anyone did not think Purdue would lose at home to Wisconsin on Zach Edey's senior day. So it wasn't really something that it felt like, Purdue had to have. But Purdue goes in and wins it anyway. Purdue overcomes a bit of a slow start to win it anyway. That was a heck of an environment to go play in. As I talked about on last week's pod, Illinois is a program and a fan base that really does not like Purdue. Those two programs could not possibly have more different of cultures than what Illinois and Purdue have. It's night and day. And that's, from top to bottom, the two programs are just completely different. So it's a bit of a culture win, I think. Braden Smith was excellent. That shot he hits over Terrence Shannon Jr., that's remarkable. Just a massive shot. Fletcher Lawyer came up huge in that game. He's quietly, maybe not even quietly, but been excellent the last couple of weeks. Guys, he was always fine. He just went through a cold stretch. It happens. That's what happens to three-point shooters. They go cold sometimes. It's part of it. What these two guys have done the last few weeks, and especially with what Braden Smith has done all year, and, to a real degree, Fletcher Lawyer, this is what we spent so much time talking about coming into this season, is those two taking a big leap as sophomores. Braden Smith has done it to a level that, was beyond best case scenario. And Fletcher Lawyer has really, really played good basketball for Purdue. That was a really big win. To go win in that environment was something, because that was a crowd that was there because, yes, they wanted Illinois to win, but they didn't like Purdue. You heard the chants at Zach Edey, and Purdue's now gone 3 straight. See if they meet in the Big Ten tournament, but Purdue's beaten Illinois 3 straight years now. Purdue's won 5 in a row over Illinois. So, that's a big deal. And then Purdue sends off the seniors with a win over Wisconsin. Wisconsin didn't go away. It was just a weird game. It felt weird the whole time. It never felt like Purdue was playing tremendously well, but it also never felt like Purdue was going to lose that game. So it is what it is, I guess. Purdue wins the game. Wisconsin does some good things. Wisconsin really spread Purdue out nicely, but when push came to shove, Wisconsin just couldn't score enough, and Wisconsin couldn't get enough stops. Because that's the weird part of this Wisconsin team, is it's not tremendously good on defense, which is as anti-Wisconsin as it gets, but that's where we're at. Tyler Wall gives Purdue some problems. He's a tough little player, but AJ Storr's up and down. He had a good day. That game was what it was. It was a Courtney Green game. Not much else needs to be said. The AJ Storr steal at the end of that game when Chase Martin's trying to dribble the clock out and Storr steals it from him. That's Wisconsin for you. That's pretty on brand. But, Purdue closes the regular season strong. And that's kind of where I want to start here today, because the regular season is done. Purdue finishes 28-3, 17-3 in Big Ten play. This comes against one of the toughest, if not the toughest, schedule in the nation. I've got KenPom up right now. KenPom has it as the number 5 strength of schedule in America. This was not a schedule that was really designed for Purdue to go 28-3. You look at some of the teams Purdue beat, and there were some really good ones. There were some really, really high-end games. Purdue beat Arizona, Tennessee, Alabama, Marquette, Illinois twice. Gonzaga's not great, but it's 16th in the net. It goes on the road and beats Wisconsin. There were some really high-end wins on this schedule. And, really, Purdue plays in what was the best MT ever, according to some. Xavier didn't work out the way maybe you hoped in the Gavitt games, but you schedule 2 really high-end non-conference games outside of that, and you win it all. You go 28-3. 17-3 in Big Ten play. That's the best anyone's done since the Big Ten went to 20 games back in 2018-19 season. Were the losses great? No. I mean, Northwestern and Nebraska, and, I guess Ohio State under Jake Diebler, because that looks like a whole new team. They're solid. They're decent teams. They're not Purdue. Purdue didn't play particularly well in those games. But were these losses kind of inevitable? I think so. You're just not going to go undefeated in conference play. There's too much talent spread out. There are too many good teams. There are too many good players to go undefeated in anything. I mean, you don't see it happen. You don't see teams flirt with this. No one in college basketball has fewer than 3 losses. James Madison going to the tournament at 30-3 is your best record in the nation. That's as good as it gets to go 28-3. The regular season won't define this year. It never was going to. But it's hard to ask for more than what Purdue did here, and I don't think that was the easiest task. Yes, the strength of schedule was really difficult. This was a great schedule that Purdue played. Purdue put itself out there to face as many challenges as it possibly could. You don't get much of a tougher non-conference schedule than that, especially in a power conference. You see some of those low majors just stack by, playing all these bye games so they can fund their athletic department. But at the power conference level, you don't see a tougher non-conference schedule than this. But Purdue handled it. And, don't want to say with ease, but Purdue handled it well. This season had the potential to just be really miserable, because Purdue was never going to be bad, but with a tough schedule, there was the real possibility that Purdue's sitting here right now at like 24-7, 23-8, where everyone knows Purdue's good, but it was underwhelming. It, put a ton of pressure on the NCAA tournament, where the pressure already began. The second Zach Edey announced he was coming back to Purdue, the pressure on the Boilermakers just got cranked up to to volume 11. It doesn't get any more pressure packed than what Purdue's about to walk into. But Purdue handled this season really well. Publicly, Purdue has never shied away from any pressure, but Purdue also never showed any signs of just being ready to get there. And that's half the battle. Because yes, Purdue wins another Big Ten title. It's wonderful. You should. You never pass up a chance to win these things, because there's going to come a day where Purdue goes through a drought and folks are reminiscing on the good old days when Purdue was stacking these things like they were checkers, just easy as can be. But the pressure is ahead of Purdue, but you've got to be happy with what Purdue's done to this point. And it's a regular season to really remember, where you're a clear-cut top 3 team at worst in the country. You're locked into a 1 seed going into the conference tournament. It's hard to get better than that. I wanted to go with senior night happening on Sunday. I wanted to talk a little bit about each of Purdue's seniors here. I got a good question in the mailbag from our good friend Frank about what Mason Gillis meant to the program, and just wanted to dive in a little bit to some of these seniors. I'll start. You can't forget the walk-ons here. I'm not close enough to it to know the ins and outs and daily tasks of a walk-on, but you hear their teammates speak incredibly highly of them. They're worth mentioning. Chase Martin, Carson Barrett, guys who obviously have done a lot for Purdue basketball. Lance Jones came in and has been as just endearing and beloved as a one-year player can possibly be. This was the perfect transfer portal recruit at the perfect time for Purdue, because he has given Purdue what it needed. Yes, just from a roster construction, he gives them some speed, some athleticism, but he gives Purdue some fearlessness, something Purdue needed. That's something Purdue didn't really have last year at times on the perimeter. He's not afraid, and you see that all the time. That's a double-edged sword. Talk about that a little more coming up in Q&A, but the transfer portal results in a lot more bad fits or, just mediocre fits than it does great fits. But Lance Jones has been a grand slam bottom of the 9th addition for Purdue. You can't possibly say enough about what he's meant to this roster. And, let's face it, I don't know that anyone saw this coming. No matter how optimistic you were on Lance Jones, I don't know that this was the outcome anyone saw. He's been terrific for Purdue. You look at Ethan Morton as a guy who is a glue piece on a program that really values winning. I think he personifies that just value of winning, just as Mason Gillis does. But, Ethan Morton's not going to go down in the record books at Purdue for statistics. He is not, his sophomore year, he shot the ball really well. It hasn't followed him to his junior and senior year. But that's not what Purdue's needed from him, at least not this year. Purdue has needed him to be a leader, to play defense, and to move the basketball, and he does that. And even now, as to a certain degree, Cam Heide has taken some of his minutes. Watch Ethan Morton on the bench. The guy is as active as anyone, cheering people on, helping Cam Heide out, pointing out things defensively, pointing out things offensively. Ethan Morton's a really valuable piece. And I know, he's gone through some hell from fans, but I don't think that's always deserved. It's easy to go after the guy that doesn't score a lot, but he's given Purdue plenty. And Purdue is a better team for having him on the squad. With Mason Gillis, I don't know that you can say enough about him. Again, another guy that just makes this program win. You've seen this year. He is hitting big shot after big shot from Purdue. There is not a more automatic shot I can remember in Purdue history than Mason Gillis at the top of the key from 3. It just seems to go in every single time. But that's him. He's coming up in big moments for Purdue. He's another guy with real leadership skills, someone who's been around for 5 years. You know, you remember back a few years ago when Purdue had the ad campaign about him. You know, how he'd been injured and then redshirted and hadn't played for 900 days or whatever it was. And, you know, it got played so much that, you know, I feel like we do forget how much he went through to get back on the court and how much he's gone through to continue playing at Purdue and playing at a really high level. An emotional leader, someone who has played his role really well. And it's almost disingenuous to call him a role player, but it's kind of what he is. It's a weird little spot he's in, but you just can't say enough about him. He has been awesome for Purdue. And then there's Zach Edey. You will never see another story like Zach Edey. It's the stuff of Disney movies. A guy is as under-recruited as it could get, who doesn't, you know, I was listening to the Matt Painter show earlier tonight, and he was talking about how Zach Edey didn't really have high school stats because he didn't really play much for IMG. Of course, you know, he was behind the big guy who went to Duke, Armando Bacot a little bit. So it's not like he was, you know, just being ignored, but he wasn't a heralded recruit. You know, I remember when he committed that whole fall of 2019 when Purdue wanted Hunter Dickinson and then Ryan Kalkbrenner and to a lesser degree that Ben Carlson kid who ended up at Wisconsin, and I have no clue what happened to that guy. But, you know, it ends up with Zach Edey to go along with Jaden Ivey and Ethan Morton. And, you know, it was just kind of okay. And then he came in, and it's just been an incredible rise to what he is now. You know, I'll never forget his first game where he, you know, goes like 9 of 10 from the field against Liberty and just destroys them. And you thought, man, they've really got something here. And there were ups and downs, you know, his freshman year, his sophomore year. But, you know, he's going to go out as the first 2-time National Player of the Year in over 40 years. He's going to go out as a 2-time Big Ten Player of the Year. I do wonder who the last guy to do that was. Did Cassius Winston do that? I really don't know. He's just been unbelievable. His number goes in the rafters on the spot on his senior night. You don't see that often. It's just been a special story. You know, there's so much to say that it's just been remarkable. It really has been. And there are going to be more great players to come through Purdue. There are going to be more great stories of young men who come through Purdue and play their college basketball at Purdue. But there will never be another one like Zach Edey. Is he the greatest player in Purdue history? Maybe. You know, he's probably going to walk out of Purdue as the all-time leading scorer, especially if Purdue goes on a little run this week. That'll be done. You just could not have possibly imagined this before he got on the campus or even when he was a freshman. No one saw this coming. Don't take groups like this senior group for granted, because in the transfer portal NIL era, it'd have been real easy for a guy like Ethan Morton, you know, after his freshman year where he gets mono and doesn't play, and, you know, looking at that roster his sophomore year, he's going to sit behind Jaden Ivey, Eric Hunter, Sasha Stefanovic, Brandon Newman, to just, you know, pack up and move on, go play more somewhere. But he didn't. Same with Mason Gillis. He could have, he could have said, I'm not going to redshirt. I don't want to do it. But he didn't. Zach Edey really wasn't going to go anywhere, and Lance Jones is a transfer portal guy, but you don't see groups like this that are so endeared to a fan base over a long period of time much anymore. This is not the rule in college basketball anymore. This is the exception. So enjoy it, because this has really been something. All right, so all 14 teams are headed up to Minneapolis for a Big Ten tournament that should be really interesting. I am fascinated to see what attendance looks like at this thing. I really have no idea what to expect. I have not talked to a single person who has said they're going, but I also don't know anyone in the state of Minnesota that I can think of. So who knows? Maybe they'll turn out like crazy. No clue what to expect. For Purdue here, this is a situation where Purdue doesn't really have a ton to gain, but, outside of injury, I don't really know what Purdue has to lose. Purdue has that number 1 seed in the Midwest locked up, and that's what matters. Whether Purdue's the number 1, number 2, number 3 overall seed, it's not going to drop below that. So it's going to have the Indianapolis to Detroit pipeline that, even going back to the start of the year, you could have pointed to that as a bit of a goal, to make sure you're the best team out of the Midwest so that you get to do that. So you can play in front of your fans, so you can, limit travel, all of that. It doesn't guarantee anything, but it sure doesn't hurt. And Purdue has that locked up already. So it's not like Purdue's entering this needing a run to solidify itself as playing Indianapolis to Detroit. Winning another Big Ten title would be great. It doesn't, again, Purdue won them both last year, and, the way the season ended made it very underwhelming. Only 3 times in Big Ten history has a program won back-to-back Big Ten tournament titles. So Purdue could do that for the first time in its school history. That'd be nice. But, there is the aspect that, you don't want to just kill yourself going into the NCAA tournament, playing 3 big-time games in 3 days. It is what it is. Everyone plays conference tournaments. The Big Ten's is a little later, but, Indianapolis is Friday, Sunday, so Purdue would get an extra day compared to the teams playing on Thursday. But it is what it is. This is a situation where Purdue can just go play, and you get your final tune-up for the NCAA tournament. I don't know that Purdue really needs it. I think Purdue's playing pretty well right now. It's on a 5-game win streak going back to that Ohio State loss. Most of those games Purdue's looked pretty good in. So that's where you're at. It's a weird tournament. Northwestern and Nebraska both having double byes is just bizarre. Michigan playing on Wednesday night and Maryland playing on Wednesday night is bizarre. It's been a weird year in the Big Ten. You've got some real bubble implications here. Iowa, Michigan State, Indiana. Indiana's probably a stretch, but if they get hot, you never know. Same with Ohio State. Who am I forgetting? There's someone else, but you've got some real bubble implications. Wisconsin should be all right, but not a good second half for the Badgers. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be fun to watch. It's, as much as I don't love the Big Ten tournament, and as much as I think conference tournaments are just generally unnecessary, they're great to watch. I mean, God, I'm recording this 9 o'clock on 9:20 on Monday night. I'm just watching the Colonial tournament earlier and the auto bids from the Samford was on earlier. I think they won. James Madison, all that stuff's fun. And it's fun to watch. It'll be fun to sit back and watch. The Big Ten awards, all conference teams get announced tomorrow. So they may have been announced by the time you're listening to this. Zach Edey will win Player of the Year. I'll be interested to see if he wins Defensive Player of the Year. I think he has quite the argument for it. There is no one who protects the rim and just impacts the game on defense like he does. It's, he's a great defensive rebounder. He blocks some shots, but teams just don't try to go to the rim on him. And you see it when he's out of the game because teams do go to the rim on Purdue and they have success. And at times it can feel like it's a Caleb First thing. It's not. It's just not having Zach Edey on the floor. That's going to be a big thing for Purdue, is you want that rim protection, but you can't just replace Zach Edey. So will he win Defensive Player of the Year? We'll see. Will Braden Smith be on the first team All Big Ten? He sure has a pretty good argument for it. That's something to watch. If Mason Gillis doesn't win Sixth Man of the Year, I don't know who does. Admittedly, no one else is coming to mind right now. I'm sure there's someone, but no one's really coming to mind. It's not Dane Danger. I have no clue. The Coach of the Year one's going to be interesting. Obviously, Matt Painter deserves it. You can say that Purdue was preseason supposed to be the Big Ten champion, and they were. But, you got to give the guy credit for recruiting these people. It's not like Braden Smith and Zach Edey were these 5-star recruits that everyone in the world wanted. Purdue evaluated those guys really, really well. Fletcher Lawyer was highly recruited, but getting Lance Jones out of the portal, he was not the most highly recruited portal guy. Purdue has built this roster really well. Matt Painter's done a tremendous job this year. He certainly deserves it. Now, that's not to say that Chris Collins, Fred Hoiberg, Ben Johnson haven't done a nice job, because they have. And that's the tricky part about this award, is what is it really rewarding? So I don't know. We'll see who wins it. I think Matt Painter's got a great argument. If I had a vote, it would go to him. And we'll see if anyone else gets an honorable mention. Like a third team for Fletcher Lawyer or Lance Jones wouldn't be out of the question. Mason Gillis, Trey Kaufman-Renn won't, but if you combine their stats, they sure would. Purdue should be well represented here, to say the least. So that's where we're at. Going into the Big Ten tournament, Purdue gets Minnesota or Michigan State at noon on Friday. It's good that you get a team you only played once, I think. I think that's a little more fun than playing a team for the third time. You beat both of them at Mackey, but you had a bit of a scare from both of them. So, not a cakewalk in either game. We'll see what Purdue does. Purdue should be in pretty good shape, though. It wouldn't shock me if Purdue wins it, but also if Purdue doesn't, I don't think it's any reason to panic. Let's get into the Q&A here. Got some good ones. Mackie Maniacs asked me where this regular season title, or no, just regular season in general, ranks since you became a Purdue fan, and then where the Big Ten championship ranks versus other ones under Matt Painter. In terms of the regular season, it's been quite a fun one. Purdue played in so many big-time non-conference games that I think that added to it. Purdue is... It's cool having Purdue as the talk of college basketball. Like, I'm sure a lot of you guys are like me, where you listen to, the national college basketball stuff. Gary Parrish and Matt Norlander. Whether you traffic in Field of 68 or not, or sleepers, some of the really overblown stuff a little bit. Locked on college basketball, whatever it is. You follow some of that, and Purdue was the story of college basketball in November and December, playing in so many big events and beating so many good teams. That's not something Purdue's always had. In terms of a regular season, that Vince Edwards, Dakota Mathias, Haas team, that was my freshman year at Purdue. Purdue goes on 19-game win streak, I think it was. That was pretty fun. Before Robbie Hummel got hurt in 09-10, that was a great regular season. Purdue starts 14-0, beats West Virginia on New Year's Day. It's right up there with that, though. 28-3 is remarkable. I don't have the history books in front of me, but I think you'd This has got to be one of the best regular seasons in Purdue history. In terms of the Big Ten championship, it's hard to compare because this one was by far the most expected one that I can think of. 2017 wasn't a complete shock. That was a good Purdue team. 2019 kind of came out of nowhere. That Purdue team wasn't supposed to be great. Same with last season. And then before that, you're going back to like the 2009 Big Ten tournament title and then 2010, which was pretty expected. I think the win at Illinois made this one a little bit sweeter for Purdue fans. I think that win was awesome if you're a Purdue fan. That was really big-time stuff. But, you compare it to that Big Ten tournament title when Purdue snapped a bit of a drought of not winning the Big Ten. And then the same deal in 2017 where it kind of felt like a very mini rebuild was completed. That's different. The two that came out of nowhere, completely different. So it's not surprising, but I do think it's satisfying to be the favorite and then go out and win the league by 3 games. That's really something. How short does the bench become in the NCAA tournament? And does Lance Jones stop forcing threes on breakaways to set up the offense? In terms of the bench, I don't think you're going to see much of a change. Purdue's going to ride the starting 5 and Mason Gillis really hard. Those are your best players. The starting 5 and then, Mason Gillis, Trey Kaufman ran hot hand a little bit. You'll see Camden Heide get some run off the bench. Caleb First and Ethan Morton will get some minutes in spot situations. And there you go. Who am I forgetting? No, that's 9. Sorry. Yeah, that's what it's going to be. I don't think you're going to see much Miles Colvin. I don't. If you're in a real free-flowing game where you need points bad, maybe, but I don't see it. I don't see that happening. I think this is going to look about the same, but I think those, the backcourt is going to get a lot of run. I don't think you're going to see a ton of subs. And then with Lance Jones forcing the threes, it is what it is. You live with the double-edged sword, the duality of Lance Jones. You saw that in the Wisconsin game. He forces one that he banks in, and then he forces a couple that aren't great. And then he hits a dagger, really the final nail in the coffin. Again, a bit of a forced shot, but he has that confidence. And that's the double-edged sword you live with. But, last year in Columbus, Ohio, as those minutes were ticking away against FDU, Purdue needed someone to do what Lance Jones has done time and time again this year. So it is frustrating. We talked about this back in November about whether he would kind of settle down a bit. It's just part of who he is. And if you're Purdue, I think you can live with that, especially if those quick shots are in a spot where you can get an offensive rebound, which in transition you often can't, but you never know. What are the keys to the NCAA tournament this year? We'll talk about this more going into the big dance next week, but don't turn the ball over and don't let the other team hang around in the rebounding battle. There have been some times where Purdue has not been as good as it should be on the glass. You cut that out, and if you don't turn the ball over, Purdue's fine. Purdue hasn't had a single problem all year. If you just look at the 3 losses, Purdue's turned the ball over too much. And that's your biggest deal. That's what it comes down to. Because Purdue is incredibly efficient on offense. It is number 1 in the country in Ken Pom offensive efficiency. It's shooting 41% from 3. It's 10th in the nation at getting offensive rebounds off its misses. I mean, this isn't hard. This isn't hard at all. This is fantastic stuff. But when you turn the ball over, you can't maximize your strengths there. What will be considered a successful run? Would it be Elite 8, Final 4, win it all? This is, if there's ever a Final 4 bust type of situation, here you go. It's kind of the case. Things have aligned for Purdue well. This is where the roster and experience lines up well. This is kind of it. Not that Purdue won't have chances to get to the Final Four in the future, because it certainly will, I think. But this is where everything has lined up better than it has for Purdue in any past year. So that's where it's at. Any concerns around the ankle injuries for Braden Smith and Zach Edey this week? I mean, not really, because Purdue put them back into the game, and I don't think Purdue would have put them back into a game if there were real concerns about their health. I just don't see that being the case. So Purdue putting him back in alleviates most of those concerns, but you don't want anyone to get hurt. You want to be cautious, but at the same time, you can't just bubble wrap the guys. You can't just not play them, because that creates a whole different situation. And as I talked about this a few weeks back, I don't think that's what you want to deal with right now if you're Purdue. That's a conversation Purdue doesn't need to be a part of. This is a good one. How much of Zach Edey's legacy at Purdue will be affected based on March success, especially for this year? A lot of it, if we're being honest. And this goes on both ways. If Zach Edey gets Purdue to a Final Four, or my goodness, if Zach Edey wins a national championship, then I think you're looking at him as the clear greatest player in Purdue history. But, if Purdue were to be eliminated early on this year, you're looking at that as a real part of his legacy too, of 4 NCAA tournaments where it didn't go particularly well for Purdue. And that's hard. It's not totally fair on him. Actually, it's not fair on him at all. But that's the reality we live in. That's the reality of college basketball we live in, where everything is so centric around the NCAA tournament. I don't think it's healthy. I don't think it's good for the sport in any way, shape, or form. But it's where we're at. And I can sit here and complain about it all I want, but it's not going to change. So that's just the reality. And then the final question, what does the future look like with this senior class leaving? I'll talk about this a lot. This will be priority number one whenever the season does come to an end, is to look ahead. But yeah, Purdue's going to look a lot different without Zach Edey, because you've had the best player in the country on your team for 2 years, but he's just so unique, because he's not like a guard where you can plug someone in and run a lot of the same stuff and not get the same production. But with Zach Edey, you're not even going to get similar production. You're not going to find someone that dominant. Daniel Jacobson can come in and be great. Ditto with Will Berg. Trey Kaufman-Wren's going to have a great year next year, I think, but they're not going to be Zach Edey. And it's not fair to expect them to be Zach Edey, because he's Zach Edey. No one's done what he's done in 40 years. Purdue's going to look different. I think Purdue has a really high floor with Braden Smith, Fletcher Lawyer, Trey Kaufman-Wren, Caleb First. I'm interested to see what he does in an offense that looks a little different. It's a little more spread out. We'll see what kind of steps forward Cam Heide, Miles Colvin make. You've got some really exciting freshmen, Cannon Catchings, Jakari Harris, Daniel Jacobson, guys coming in, Jack Benner, Raleigh Burgess, CJ Cox. Don't want to leave anyone out. It's going to be interesting. It's going to be real interesting. I think Purdue's still going to be good. I think Purdue's still going to be competitive, but I don't think it's fair to sit here and expect Purdue to go, be in the top 5 all season next year either. That's going to look different. But that's what I've got for today and this week. Thank you for spending your time with me. That's a wrap on the regular season. 31 games down, as many as 9 games to go. Thank you guys for spending the regular season with me. Be sure to subscribe. There's going to be plenty to talk about here from now until whenever it wraps up for Purdue. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of it. Follow the show on Twitter. Come join the conversation at Boilers Beyond. You can always send in questions there. DM them to me, tweet them to me, whatever floats your boat. You can also email the show, boilersandbeyondpod@gmail.com. I'll keep you posted on Twitter. We'll see when I record. Really kind of depends what Purdue does in the Big Ten tournament. We'll see what happens, but we'll be here soon. And until then, enjoy the Big Ten tournament and enjoy the selection show.